For those of you not familiar with the Maryland Legislative Coalition, we are a coalition of over 30 some grassroots groups across Maryland. And for the last 3 years, we've been promoting actions and encouraging action and advocacy on progressive legislation. The city of Plant has started another branch of the Maryland Legislative Coalition called the Climate Justice Wing, which is promoting legislation on climate legislation. This year, they will be focusing on two bills. One is the Climate Solutions Act, and the other is the Transit Safety Act. The Climate Justice Wing is a coalition of both NGOs and grassroots groups, and it's doing some great work. We also, if you're wondering why we don't have an environmental session, that's because that will take place on January 8th and 9th and 10th. And it'll be entitled the Eastern Shore Legislative Summit. We will be posting links in the chat to that summit if you would like to sign up. Now, there are a couple of things that technical things we need to go over. We will also be posting a PDF of the one-page summary of our speakers. We will be posting links to the Maryland Legislative Coalition website and Maryland Legislative Coalition Facebook page. Now, if you have any questions, please post them in chat with the word ask first. Ask and then put the name of the person. We have a question moderator who will be Alex, who will be going through reading on any questions that are put in the chat. And at the end of this presentation, we will have 30 minutes for questions. And she will ask the questions that anybody puts in the chat. The session is being, whoa. Lost my camera.
Lost your camera?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. Well, there we go. We're still working on the sound. Anyway. So let's see, anything else I need? Oh, yes. And then I would like to thank Jimmy Tarlow, Jess Gorski, Eileen Alex, John Wells, Tom Bryson, and Scott Weber for all their work in helping putting this summit together. Now, for our first speaker, we shall have Tyra Robinson of the Public Justice Center. So please unmute her.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, assuming that you can. Good morning to the Maryland Legislative Coalition Summit. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity.
Spotlight.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Tyra Robinson, and I'm an attorney at the Public Justice Center and at the Public Justice Center and the Workplace Justice Project. PJC is a nonprofit civil legal services organization working to eradicate poverty and racial inequity. Our Workplace Justice Project works to ensure justice and equity in workplaces.
Mute my video.
I'm here today to make you aware of amendments that the Public Justice Center is proposing to Maryland's sick leave law, which is the Maryland Healthy Working Families Act. The ongoing pandemic has made obvious structural failures and inadequacies in our systems. The conditions leading to these failures being racism, capitalism, and diminution of the humanity in others. Because the pandemic resulted from these traits, responding to the pandemic must address the undoing of those traits to make better systems in the future. Front-facing employees are disproportionately Black, Latinx, and other workers of color, who are the primary modes of income for their families. These groups are also subsequently dying at rates 3 times higher than white workers from COVID-19. Assuring workers have the support they need right now to get through the pandemic and thrive beyond it is good for the lives of workers, public health, and the economy. Our proposed amendments will do several things, including removing exemptions from workers currently ineligible for state sick leave, which include agricultural workers, temporary workers, seasonal workers, and on-call health professionals such as PRNs. Our proposed amendments will also supply 14 additional days of paid sick leave upon the declaration of a public health emergency, and these 14 additional days would only be available during a declared public health emergency. Our proposed amendments will also increase the maximum number of general sick days a worker can normally accrue from 5 to 7, as well as close the gap in sick leave coverage for many workers left behind when originally passed in 2018. These amendments are necessary because not all workers who are risking their lives to go to work in person are categorized by the state as mission critical or essential, but any worker is at risk of falling ill to coronavirus or other illness. Our proposed amendments seek to cover the maximum number of workers possible. The second reason these amendments are necessary is because our current sick leave law in Maryland does not allow workers to use earned sick leave during a public health emergency or for public health emergency related reasons. Workers who have exhausted their earned sick leave from this year already and without the extension of the federal sick leave law will again be forced to make the decision to go to work sick or lose a crucial paycheck. And worse yet, if they don't have any leave available remaining, to lose their job altogether. Finally, our current sick leave law does not allocate for paid sick time during a public health emergency. Because the original intent of the Healthy Working Families Act was to make it so that workers would not need to choose between missing a crucial paycheck and going to work sick, these same principles should apply and be amplified during a public health emergency. Our current sick leave law does not allocate enough time to recover from multiple illnesses during a short period of time, which is obviously now possible if someone falls ill to coronavirus and, for instance, the flu in nearby time periods. Thankfully, we're not yet in a position in which we cannot change the trajectory of this story. Rather, we're able now to make meaningful and inclusive change for more Marylanders during this unprecedented time. One way in which we can do that is through amending Maryland's existing sick leave law. Without the workers who power businesses, businesses won't survive. For more information or to get involved with this campaign, you can email me at robinsont@publicjustice.org. You can also go to the Public Justice Center's website to sign our support letter that will be available shortly. Thank you.
You have 10. I mean, you still have some time left.
Yes, that's all that I prepared. If there's any questions, I could take some now directly
Okay.
or
All
save
right.
them
Great.
to the
Thank
end.
you.
You're welcome. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Tyler. All right. Next up is Callie Schmutz. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. From the Maryland Center on Economic Policy.
Great. Hi, thanks for having me today. I am Callie Shumitz. I'm Director of Communications and Partner Engagement at the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. Sorry, my dogs are barking right now. So we are, one second.
Yeah, she just started.
They have excellent timing. So we're a research and advocacy organization. We're broadly focused on economic justice. And we believe that all Marylanders should be able to achieve their full potential in a healthy economy that offers a widely shared and rising standard of living. And public investments that are made through our state budget and our tax system are a big part of that. Well, we're working to support many of the other policies that you'll hear about today. Our top priority this session is raising revenue. Our top priority this session is raising revenue in a way that makes our tax system more equitable and ensures that everyone pays their fair share for the services that we all benefit from. revenue sits at the foundation of everything else we want to do at the state. And so when we were here last year, we were really focused on raising revenue to support bold and long overdue investments in our education system through the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. That is not the only part of our state budget that has been neglected in the last decade plus since the Great Recession. Sorry, I'm gonna go I will be right back.
You want to switch? Why don't we switch, Ed? Ed, why don't you do somebody else and go back to Callie?
Come back, yes. Let's get Ricara Jones. Tom, we'll put Ricara Jones up of the 1199 SCIU.
Good morning. Good morning. I just want to first start off by thanking the Maryland Legislative Conference for putting the summit on. It's one that I look forward to each and every year. Wish we were all in person, but you know, the information that you all provide during these summits is so important. My name is Ricara Jones. I am the political director with 1199 SEIU. We represent healthcare workers across the state of Maryland and in DC, in both nursing homes and hospitals. So I'll just start. We had about, I don't think any of us would have imagined that we would be in this, you know, a global pandemic a few years ago. But right now we're seeing a lot of rising cases and a number of infections. And while some of us do have the luxury to work from home, there are thousands and thousands of frontline workers that don't have that luxury and are still required to go out and work in person, to provide groceries, care for our children, care for our loved ones, make sure that we have the supplies that we need so that we can continue our day-to-day lives. And I just want to, you know, just take a moment and just thank all of those workers, any workers that are on this call right now and watching this. Just thank you for the huge sacrifice that you make day in and day out for the rest of us. You know, what we've seen is that even though we call these workers frontline workers and we call them our heroes, when they're showing up to work, they are lacking basic safety and health protections to keep them safe at work. So what we did is we listened to a lot of frontline workers' experiences and drafted some legislation based off of some basic demands that workers should have to keep them safe at work. We, according to the Maryland Health Department, one of the #1 hotspots to contract COVID is at a workplace. So we know that we're sending frontline workers into danger zones and not even giving them the protections to keep them safe and or their families safe. So I'm going to walk through our, just quickly walk, it's a very long bill, but I'm going to just walk through 6 major pieces of it, and I'm going to share my screen. So if someone can, if you guys can let me know if you can see the document. Are you able to see it? Yes, great, awesome, okay. So just to start, one of the first ones, it's called the Maryland Essential Workers Protection Act. And one of the first portions of the bill is safe and hygienic working conditions, just to make sure that there are safety protocols, standards in place. And a major part of this is a requirement that workers have to have PPE at work, not only PPE, but adequate PPE. There are so many stories of frontline workers that are reusing PPE over and over and over again, or they just don't have any adequate PPE at all. We had some examples where workers in healthcare settings were giving rain ponchos and shower caps as PPE during a part of this pandemic. So we just want to make sure that that there are requirements for adequate PPE during the pandemic. The second one is hazard pay and healthcare assistance. We want to make sure that frontline workers they're working in a hazard and they should be paid for that. A lot of frontline essential workers are, as you heard Tyra say, most of them are low wage workers and are making maybe $12 or $13 an hour and they're risking their lives. So we want to make sure that they are given this some additional hazard pay. There was also a frontline worker that shared a story that they were forced to quarantine. They couldn't quarantine at home and they had to pay for a hotel outside of their own pocket. So there are a lot of additional costs that come along with working during a pandemic. We also just want to make sure that there's open enrollment for Maryland Health Benefit Exchange during a pandemic as well. The next section is emergency action plans. When this hit, I think it threw all of us at a surprise, hit all by surprise. We want to make sure that for the future, both employers and employees know what to expect when something like this happens. So you'll know what the work hours are. You able to work from home? Do you need to report in person? And what are the PPE standards? What is sanitation going to look like at the workplace? So these emergency action plans will really help to clear some of that up. The next one is universal health and bereavement leave. You again just heard about how important it is to have leave. This would provide 14 days of leave. Where there are so many examples of workers who've had to have tested positive, have needed to quarantine, and some employers did provide some paid leave, some didn't. There are folks who are now being forced to use their own time to quarantine that are, and it's going to have a very tough financial impact if you're still required to use your own time when you need to quarantine. We want to make sure that folks are staying safe. And there's also 3 days of paid leave for bereavement. Number 5 is the right to refuse dangerous work. We want to make sure that, if employees are asked to engage in unsafe work, that they can refuse and that they won't be retaliated against by the employers. And that MOSH, which is the Maryland Occupational Safety and Health Program, are doing actual investigations of those claims. And the last is free testing and reporting of positive test results. For example, there in nursing homes, workers are mandated to be tested. We want to make sure that, if there are mandates for testing, the cost of that test does not fall on the employee and that free testing is provided. We also think that the test results should be reported by industry. We should know if there are high cases in one industry or another so that we can start to look at that and do further investigations. Also, workers should also know if they've come into contact with someone that could possibly be infected. There are so many examples of workers showing up and not knowing that a coworker or someone had tested positive and they were at risk of being infected. So if you would like to have more information, we do have a website. It's www.protectmarylandworkers.org, which I'll also just drop in the chat. But I want to, thank you all for this opportunity to share this piece of legislation that we're working on today. Thank you.
Unmute. Oh, we're getting feedback. Sorry, we're still working on our technical sound problems. Thank you, Rikara. That's great. Next up, back to Kylie. Kylie Schumans.
Yes. A little quieter here now, so hopefully you can hear me better. Sorry about that.
Good, thank you.
So as I was saying, our top priority this session is raising revenue in a way that makes our tax system more equitable and ensures that everyone pays their fair share for the services we all benefit from. This is really important because revenue sits at the foundation of everything else we want to do as a state to support our communities, respond to the pandemic, and grow stronger coming out of this. So when we were here last year, we were really focused on raising revenue to support the bold and long overdue investments in our education system through the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. But education funding is not the only part of our state budget that has been neglected in the last decade plus since the Great Recession. Just another quick example is local health departments, which receive funding from the state. The state has been giving the same dollar amount to local health departments every year for more than a decade. We know that when that kind of flat funding, as costs increase, as inflation happens, amounts to a budget cut. Um, so before the pandemic, state revenue was already often falling short of what was needed to just maintain our current programs and services, let alone make new investments to address community needs. And the economic challenges from the pandemic have only made that worse. So I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of the revenue package that we're supporting along with the Maryland Fair Funding Coalition. I'll share my screen. Can see a couple slides here. So our revenue proposals kind of fall into three main buckets. I'm not going to walk through each bill in detail because it's a large package, but I'm happy to follow up with additional information on any of these. So one big group is closing corporate loopholes. So there are a number of tax loopholes that allow these large, profitable multi-state corporations that are still doing really well despite the economic challenges of the pandemic to use accounting gimmicks, move money around on paper to reduce their state taxes. And small businesses can't use these tactics. This is really important to kind of leveling the playing field between big business and small business. So these include combined reporting, the throwback rule, ending the MLC loophole, which is large companies are increasingly using incorporating as an LLC or an S corp to avoid paying the corporate income tax, and then ending ineffective tax credits. In addition to the things that are kind of baked into our tax code, the state has a lot of special tax credits that go to overwhelmingly to larger businesses because they're the ones that have the resources to go after them. And there's a lot of reporting from the state's own analysis that these aren't effective and aren't working as intended. The next big bucket is kind of fixing our upside down tax code. When you look at our tax system overall, the wealthiest 1% of Marylanders pay a smaller share of their income in state and local taxes than anyone else. And the income tax is really the most powerful tool we have to address this. So we have proposed restructure of our income tax brackets that adds additional tax brackets for millionaires on the high end, restructures the brackets all around. And the overall impact of that is that it lowers taxes for low-income people, working families, while adding tax brackets on the high end. And also additional priority of Maryland Center on Economic Policy, which is not specifically part of the work that the Fair Funding Coalition is doing, is continuing to expand our state level working family tax credits, like the earned income tax credit, and potentially establishing a child tax credit. So it's another way we can help lower taxes for those who are, having a hard time right now, who are lower income, while also raising revenue for the state. The income tax restructure is also the bill that has the largest revenue generated. It's about $550 million a year. So, if we can only do one part of this package, that's really the most effective to raise a large amount of revenue and have the greatest impact on making our tax code more equitable. There we go. And so the third bucket is taxing income from wealth, like income from work. So the federal tax code gives special treatment to capital gains income, which is money people make from investing in the stock market and other things, where you have to already have built up wealth and able to be able to do that. and that gets favorable treatment compared to regular income that people get from their paychecks. So we have several bills that are aimed at addressing that special treatment, and as well as restoring the estate tax, which in 2014 we gave a big tax break to multimillionaire heirs when we increased the estate tax exemption to 5 million. So we're proposing to bring it, there's legislation proposing to bring it back down to $1 million. And the estate tax is a really important tool for equity as well, because a lot of the income that is passed through estates, especially these very large estates, is again this income from wealth that's built up value over time and hasn't actually ever been taxed. So this is a really important part of that system. And then, so that's our package. I have our info as well as the Fair Funding Coalition information here if you want more information. And happy to answer questions or go into more detail another time. But with that many bills in our package, it's hard to go into too much detail on any one of them in a short presentation.
Hey, is there anybody you'd like to introduce? Never mind. Okay. Next up, we have Donna Edwards of the AFL-CIO.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with everybody this morning, and I'm like Ricard. I wish it was in person. I want to tell Callie, when the dogs were barking, it was so real to my cats. They lined up behind me, the two of them, and started meowing, like, why are you letting them in here? So it was a good thing. This is coming before our legislative conference. I'm Donna Edwards. I'm president of the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO. We represent about 350,000 union members in the state and DC. And so, and we're a conglomerate of all the unions. We have over 700 affiliates. We have a legislative conference scheduled for next week. And so that's where affiliates will be presenting their main priorities for this legislative session. I just want to concentrate on two that definitely are going to be front and center for us. And one is, of course, creating more wealth for workers. And the second will be on issues surrounding COVID health and safety issues. So let me just say, as far as a just economy for everybody, or an economy that works for all, as we put it, really begins with the right of workers to be able to collectively bargain through being able to join, form a union, and have a seat at the table with management. We can fight for everything that we have in Maryland, and we'll be working on many of the bills that you all are presenting. But without really having a collective voice against the employer, or even in concert sometimes, everything that we win legislatively is a battle for a worker on their own out in a workplace. And so when the Clean Jobs Energy Bill was passed, the Clean Jobs Act, there's a lot of information in that we are continuing to put forward to legislators, saying if you're going to give tax credits to businesses, then businesses need to pay family sustaining wages, pay benefits, have a retirement security, have affordable health care, allow to have benefits, allow the workers to organize if they so choose. And then we also have protections in there for community benefits, if it's building, project labor agreements, prevailing wage. All of these things really increase the wages and help with combating the wealth gap that has happened over the last 30, 40 years. And every study, all academia, everything points to the strength in unions and rebuilding back the economy and rebuilding back the wealth for the lower and middle class. Because not only is it for what workers gain at the table in an organized labor organization, but then it's competition for the non-organized businesses because they don't want to lose their employees. So, I mean, obviously, President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris have made this front and center. We will be working very hard in Maryland to further that in every type of tax giveaway that they give in businesses. We don't need Maryland's hardworking money from workers being used to create low wage or low road jobs. And of the 19 tax credits given away, most of them only require that you pay 20% above minimum wage. And that's with taxpayers' money. All workers contribute to the economy, and all workers need to have a fair return on what they are contributing to Maryland. That's that. And as far as COVID goes, we definitely will be working on the bill that Riccara was putting forward. There is a lot of nuances to this. I've been working in a coalition. We started back in March telling the legislature what at minimum was needed. And let me be clear that even at the state government, our governor may be on television everywhere proclaiming what we've done, but even within the state offices, essential employees have been left without PPE. And so we've had that, we've had it in construction over and over again. Imagine so many of the construction sites that don't even have running water, let alone hot water to keep clean, and how close they are when they're holding up things and welding them together, or they're working side by side on laying a concrete. This is really so far reaching. Of course, you know, we know what happened in the poultry. We know what happened with grocery workers, you know, and I don't even know if you're aware that postal workers are getting so infected. Talking to the president of the postal workers, letter carriers in Baltimore last week, in one day, 13 of his people tested positive at 13 different stations. We know that bus drivers have fallen ill, and we've had deaths in bus drivers. We've had 7 deaths in grocery workers. So it's not just now understanding the death, but it's like the people that were invisible to us, and the ones that this group, that you guys work so hard to push forward a sick leave bill, minimum wage, and people thought they were invisible. That's who we went and saw. We wanted to go to the 7-Eleven just to have contact, and people forget those people. And we cannot allow the heroes that were there to get us through in the very beginning to be forgotten any longer, and to not have a say. So there's going to be a few bills that come forward talking about emergency standards, talking about coverage for what's needed at the state level for public employees. And that's just not at the state level. That's also, we saw, you know, our trash collections that had to just be stopped because people were being infected. Obviously, this showed a huge hole in our health system that we really were not prepared. The other thing that we're along with that is that we're going to be starting to talk more and more about manufacturing, bringing real jobs to Maryland, taking the opportunity that we have through what we're learning as far as what we've seen in the pandemic and the lack of resources, what we see in the emerging clean energy. We've got to manufacture, not just build and not just service, if we want to have real jobs for Marylanders. So that's our agenda in a nutshell with no specifics, and look forward to talking and working with all of you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Don Edwards. Jimmy, is there anybody you'd like to introduce?
In terms of the delegates, I see Delegate Al Carr, Delegate Jessica Feldmark, Delegate Sheila Ruth, and I think head of the Montgomery Board of Education, Brenda Wolf, and Erin Mansour from Senator Lamb's office. If I missed anybody, I'll try and get you later.
All right, thank you, Jimmy. All right, next up, we have Samuel Jordan and Sheila Roos from the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. Go ahead, Samuel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ed, and thank you again, of course, to the Maryland Legislative Coalition. I'm Samuel Jordan, president of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. And we certainly are glad to participate in another excellent legislative proposal convention. Delegate Sheila Ruth has consented to sponsor a legislative initiative that addresses the need for a more effective application of the principles of equal access and equal protection under the law in the state's transportation statutory provisions. Delegate Ruth will summarize the provisions of the proposed statute that will be referenced as the Transportation Equity Analyses and Assurances Act of 2021. And I will speak about the assurances that we propose in order to suppress and hopefully eliminate impermissible disparities in the services provided and what may be called major changes in policy, services, programs, budgeting, and expenditures in the transportation sector. Delegate Sheila Ruth.
Okay, good place.
Thank you. Thank you, Samuel. And I want to thank the Maryland Legislative Coalition for all your work putting together this summit again. This has been excellent. And I want to thank all the presenters today and yesterday for the work that you're doing on behalf of Marylanders, much needed work. So Maryland has a long history of racist transportation decisions. Two glaring examples are the Highway to Nowhere and the cancellation of the Red Line. But beyond that, there are decisions made every year that have potential disparate impact. And that besides the negatives, there is a potential for transportation to address longstanding, play a part in addressing longstanding disparities in wealth, income, health, education, and housing, and so much more. Because transportation connects people, transportation can encourage economic development, bring people to jobs, create direct jobs. There's so much that transportation can do, and so when we look at for example, the September cuts that were thankfully canceled, to anyone looking at them, there's clearly disparate impact. But we don't know that because we don't have data. I've actually been in touch with MDOT and asked if they did any kind of transit equity, service equity analysis. And the answer is that they were working on it. Whether that would have ever come to light or not, we don't know. But the cuts were canceled within days of the hearings. That's much too late to be getting this kind of data. We need, this kind of information earlier in the process. But beyond that, it's really important that we center equity in everything that we do. We're now 50 years plus past the civil rights movement, and we have not made the progress that we should have made. And, we're not going to make that progress by ignoring it. We're not going to make that progress by being colorblind. We have to be intentional in our decisions. So the goal of this bill is not just to address disparate impact, but to center equity in the transportation decisions early in the process, in the planning and the decision-making process. Also to increase transparency and to collect the kind of data we need to make those kind of decisions in an informed way. So there's three parts to the bill. The first part adds some things to the Maryland Transportation Plan and the sorry, I'm blanking out on the name of the attainment report. Sorry,
Yes,
the Maryland
the attainment
Transportation
report.
Plan and the attainment report. So the Maryland Transportation Plan is a plan that's a long-term plan that's developed every 5 years that has specific goals in it. And then the attainment report ties into that with measurable indicators on the progress we're making on those goals, and it's released annually. So the first part of this bill would add equity as a required goal in the Maryland Transportation Plan, and add to the attainment report, first of all, the requirement to disaggregate data by race where it's appropriate to do that. You know, obviously some data like metric tons moved through the port probably doesn't need to be disaggregated by race, but there's a lot of things that should be looked at in terms of the racial impact. For example, jobs supported by the MDOT capital program, length of commute, transit on time percentage, access to jobs within a reasonable commute time, condition of MDOT capital investments, overall satisfaction with MDOT, transportation related emissions, and access to transit. Many of these are things that are already being measured in the attainment report, but just in terms of overall numbers. And we need to look at them in terms of the racial impact. The second part of the bill would create a commission on transportation equity. Now, when we started working on this bill, we were looking specifically at transit, but you know, we really need to look at the bigger picture of transportation, because all of the different modes of transportation are competing for the same dollars from the Transportation Trust Fund. So we really need to look at equity in a bigger way. And so the second part of this bill would create a commission on transportation equity that would be independent of MDOT, but work closely with MDOT to develop policies and performance measures to ensure that Maryland's transportation system is equitable, to advise MDOT, and you know, also to develop guidelines for conducting transit equity analysis, which really it leads into the third part of the bill, which in some ways parallels the Title VI process. So under Title VI, the Federal Transportation Authority has requirements already to avoid disparate impact in transit decisions. And there is a requirement that an equity analysis be done for any major service changes, but there's a couple of issues. One is that it leaves it up to the transit agencies to determine what is a major service change and what is disparate impact. And, you know, because Maryland's transit system is all very centrally controlled and very closely under the governor, you know, we need to be looking at that in a different way. And so the bill, you know, would require this, it sets, the third part of the bill sets some requirements for the state in terms of defining the disparate impact and the major service change. Those requirements would be defined by the Commission on Transportation Equity. It also requires that information to be completed before any public hearings, because we can't have public hearings until we have that kind of data. It also has some requirements about reaching out to impacted communities and community leaders, particularly focusing on racial minority communities, low-income communities, disabled riders, limited English proficiency riders, and transit-reliant riders. And then there are some requirements on, you know, what happens if a disparate impact is discovered. So really hope that, you know, this bill will have an impact on equity in Maryland, not only in transportation, but in all of the other areas that transportation has a potential to impact. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Samuel.
Thank you, Sheila, Delegate Ruth. Our proposed bill is the Transportation Equity Analyses and Assurances Act of 2021. And the necessity of assurances was on statewide display on September 1, 2020, when we were treated to what we call a September surprise. MDOT MTA proposed a boldly racially discriminatory set of cuts in transportation services. And the transportation services were to be reduced on at least a dozen routes in Baltimore City, and over 25 routes were to be permanently discontinued. On September 30th, 2020, all the proposed reductions and terminations of service were rescinded. All were rescinded. The region-wide rejection of the proposed cuts was instant due to the readily apparent impacts on Black communities essential workers, transit workers, people of color, middle and high school students, low-income households, and transit-reliant riders. Within hours of the announcement of the proposals, a joint statement by the region's elected political leadership was released demanding an immediate recall of the proposals. Now, if the whole community of responding employers, transit riders, and public officials could see the racially disparate impacts of the September surprise, why couldn't MDOT-MTA before the cuts in service were proposed? We have not gotten an answer to that question yet. The bill we propose requires not only an examination of the impacts on the targeted services, but a comparison of the impacts across the state-controlled transportation sector. For example, the MARC service with its 26% Black ridership was scheduled for not more than 4 to 8% in service cuts, while the core bus service with its 83% Black ridership was to absorb 21% in service cuts and reductions. We saw no proposed reductions in services at the seaport, the airport, the highway division, nor the proposed $9 to $11 billion expansion of I-270 and 495, dropping in 2 toll lanes in both directions on each thoroughfare. That is what is meant by the term disproportionately adverse. Now we'll add this for your consideration. The MARC rail and commuter bus services were to be temporary. Only the cuts to the core bus service were to be permanent. They were not only disproportionately adverse, but planned to be permanently disproportionately adverse. Yet, as late as October 20th, MTA Administrator Kevin Quinn declared on Midday with Tom Hall on WYPR at the end of his interview segment that equity is absolutely critical to us. I'll repeat that, quote, equity is absolutely critical to us, end quote. You can find that interview on the link in the chat. We'll post it. BTEC has gotten tremendous response and support from that broadcast. Had there been an enforceable policy under Maryland law, like the Transportation Equity Analyses and Assurances Act of 2021, requiring prior analyses of the various impacts of the failed September surprise, requiring prior consultation with transit riders and with the members and leaders of the communities most directly affected before they were proposed, you may be assured they would not have been proposed and certainly not enacted. In broad summary, the Transportation Equity Analyses and Assurances Act of 2021 takes another approach to matters of equity and fairness in public transportation policymaking. That is, we believe we should promote equity with greater emphasis on anticipation and prevention, rather than the existing dominant focus on recovery and correction. Before the fact is much better than after the fact. Thank you.
Thank you,
Delegate,
Sam.
thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. That was very good. Next up, we have Matan Zeimer of the Jews United for Justice.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Great. Thank you so much for convening everyone here. I feel very grateful to be a part of this, especially alongside so many of our close partners who have obviously been longtime champions of these issues for economic justice across Maryland. So my name is Matan Zeimer. I'm a community organizer with Jews United for Justice. JUFJ represents about 6,000 Jews from across the state of Maryland, and we act together on our shared values to pursue social, racial, and economic justice in our local communities and at the state level by advancing campaigns for immediate and concrete improvements in people's lives. We work in partnership with organizations made up of or accountable to those who are personally impacted by the challenges we work to address. Each year, we work with partners and our leaders to select our priority legislation. And this year, we're going to be focusing on 5 key issue areas, which include paid family and medical leave, police accountability, renters' rights, immigrant justice, and courts and prisons reform. Arguably, all of these issues are economic justice issues, and all of them are interrelated. But today I'm going to focus on 2 of our priority issues, which is renters' rights and paid family and medical leave. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see if I can do this. Great. Hopefully you all can see. No, sorry about that. Let's see if I can try that one more time. All right, can you see the one pager now? Great.
Yes.
So this should be the document that you all have access to. It's a very brief overview of the 5 issue areas that I just mentioned, but I will dive in with renters' rights. And we work very closely with the Public Justice Center, as well as Renters United Maryland, to advance renters' rights at the state level. So this year, it looks like we are narrowing down on 3 key priority pieces of legislation, and they're listed here, and I'm happy to provide these more detailed one-pagers to anyone who's interested. They'll also be available on our website shortly. So the first is emergency eviction prevention. This is going to be sponsored by Delegate Wilkins and Senator Smith. And it addresses things like prohibiting landlords from terminating or not renewing leases unless they have a legitimate reason to do so, particularly during the pandemic. Failure to pay rent is not a legitimate reason. Establish minimum arrears amount for filing a failure to pay rent. Expanding the CDC and Governor Hogan's executive order to cover all eviction filings, and other than imminent threat until April of 2022. Banning late fees, interest charges, or raising rent rates throughout the pandemic, and provide financial relief for landlords by creating a program to mandate matching state and county budget funds for landlords to provide rent forgiveness. The fact that we do not have a comprehensive ban on evictions during a pandemic has been an incredible challenge. We're seeing thousands of Marylanders facing impending evictions or have already faced evictions, and we're really working hard with our partners to put an end to this practice. So we're hoping that the Maryland General Assembly will take this up seriously this coming legislative session and enact something meaningful and impactful. The other piece, second piece here, is right to counsel. You may have heard some advancements on this at the local level. Baltimore City just passed a right to counsel for renters bill, and that's going into effect very shortly. But this right to counsel bill will be sponsored by Delegate Fisher and Senator Heddleman, and aiming to provide low-income tenants with the right to legal counsel and representation in rent court. We know that there are incredible disproportionate power imbalances in rent court. Currently, 1% of tenants in rent court are represented, while 98% of landlords are. So establishing a right to counsel would not only help renters by reducing evictions, it would also save the state $18.1 million, in addition to similar savings in local jurisdictions. The third piece of rent-related legislation is the rent court reform. It's be sponsored by Delegate Wells and Senator Sidner, and an increased potential for alternative resolutions by establishing a formal pretrial structure for service providers to engage renters and landlords, for judges to order alternative dispute resolution if deemed appropriate. So when no alternate resolution can be reached, it'll increase the fairness of trials by providing renters time to seek counsel, and to adequately prepare for trial. Currently, renters are given little to no time to prepare for trial, which again feeds into power imbalances and high rates of eviction. Third piece is giving judges broader power to delay eviction in emergency situations and allowing time for renters to relocate should that be deemed necessary. The last point on renters' rights here I want to just note is that we will, as JFJ, we will be supporting tenant screening reform, which we know that there's a couple of bills being proposed this session, which would establish regulations to prevent landlords' use of irrelevant, incomplete, or inaccurate information about tenants to bar them from housing. And we know that this is a huge issue for many, many Marylanders. We're hoping that will be addressed this year as well. And again, if Zephyr ends up joining us today, he is helping to lead a lot of this work, and I'm sure can answer a lot of questions that will come up as well. Now I'll jump over to paid family and medical leave. This is going to be the Time to Care Act, which many of you are likely familiar with from previous years. So this will be reintroduced this year. It's being sponsored by Senator Hayes and Delegate Valderrama. And it will be very similar to last year's Time to Care Act, and really seeks to establish a family and medical leave insurance program through which employees can take up to 12 weeks of paid leave from work to care for the birth, adoption, or fostering of a child, to provide care for themselves or family members with serious health or medical conditions, or to address the needs resulting from a military family member's deployment. Again, as many of you are probably familiar, the program's funding comes from employees and employers, each making a 0.05% mandatory contribution from each paycheck. And lost wages are not replaced dollar for dollar, but lower wage workers will receive higher percentage of their income. I also want to give a shout out to one of our JFJ leaders who's on the call today, Joe Schifrin, who has been working on this legislation for a long time and has brought a lot of great advocacy to this work. This bill is incredibly crucial, always has been, but the pandemic itself has really made the need for paid family and medical leave all the more evident, right? There are too many folks who are put in a situation where they have to decide between their employment and their income and their health and well-being. And that should never be a decision that has to be made by anyone. And the paid family and medical leave would go a long way in terms of addressing that and saving the state lots of money, right? And so we know that that's a big factor when we come into Annapolis for the legislative session. So we have the numbers on our side. We also know that 78% of voters in Maryland support the Time to Care Act, and 51% strongly favor the proposal. So there's large public support for this. It's much needed, and the time is now for Time to Care Act. And so we look forward to working with our partners in the Time to Care Act Coalition. A number of members are on the call today to move this forward. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam. Now I will turn you over to our question moderator, Alex.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to ask that our speakers come off mute and thank them for their informative presentations. The first detailed questions came for Callie, of course, having to do with taxes. She's answered some of them already in the chat line, but I'm going to ask her to repeat for people who are on the phone so that they get the benefit of this information. The first question was, do estate and inheritance tax revenues go into the general fund? If not, they could be a source of funds without raising taxes. Callie?
Yes. So just quickly, for those who aren't super familiar with state budget terms, the general fund is the main pool of money that supports most state functions. The state also has special funds that are usually dedicated to a special purpose. So the estate tax does go into the general fund. It's revenue that can be used for any purpose that the governor and the legislature approve it for. And I think as part of preparing for this fiscally challenging time, Maryland Center on Economic Policy, it's also been looking closely at what is in all those different special funds. Is there money that the state could use? I think the situation, as I was saying in my introduction, that we're in, we've been for more than a decade now, since the last recession, year after year, shifting money around, like using up a lot of that money that is flexible, that can be shifted to other purposes to fill gaps. So we, even before this current pandemic and the effects that's had in the state policy, the state budget and revenues, we already were in a situation where we needed more revenue.
Okay, there seems to be some problem with echo, and we're asking that speakers, while they can stay on, stay live, they need to turn down their speakers in the meantime.
It's okay.
Okay, it's no problem now. We've got it. I think we got it fixed. Okay, so Callie, one more question. Are specific bills proposing capital gain surtax and returning to the previous estate tax? Lowering estate tax is passed on arguments about family farms inheritance, as I remember. So I'm a little unfamiliar with this. Please forgive me if I didn't read the question right.
Sure. Yeah, we have, those are 3 different bills. Delegate Julie Polakovich-Carr is sponsoring the 2 of them that are related to capital gains income. So that's a surtax on capital gains to offset the special treatment at the federal level, and one that addresses the carried interest loophole, which is a special tax break in the federal tax code that applies only to investment fund managers, like hedge fund managers. The way that they're compensated, they don't pay the regular income tax rate. So Delegate Polakovich-Carr has those bills. On the estate tax. Delegate Janelle Wilkins is the sponsor for that bill. And yes, that was something that was used as a talking point in the prior conversations around the estate tax. The reality is there have always been exemptions for family farms. Those are still in the estate tax law. They have additional exemptions, and those would stay in place with the new changes. So the estate tax is only paid by, if it went back down to the $1 million exemption level, that would still only apply to about 3% of estates in Maryland. And it's also important to keep in mind that it's an exemption. So the first $1 million of the estate is exempt. So if you have an estate that's $1,100,000, you pay, the tax only applies to that $100 that's above $1 million.
Okay, and one last question that I promised I'd ask of all of our speakers. What kind of support and roadblocks do you see for both horizontal and vertical in what you're trying to accomplish this year? Callie.
Sure. So, I think it's going to be a challenging legislative session just because of the nature of it. It's going to be remote. It's going to be a new environment, both for the legislators and for us who are trying to educate legislators about these issues. I think in terms of who is going to be, opposing these proposals, it's going to be the same people who oppose tax legislation in any situation. I think that's usually, the Chamber of Commerce, some of the other groups that are supporting or representing these large businesses. They're arguing against these changes on a regular basis. We do have, I did mention a couple of our sponsors in response to the last question. We do have a great group of sponsors in the House. Our other bill sponsors are Delegate Vaughn Stewart, Delegate Mary Lehman, and Delegate Stephanie Smith. And in the Senate, Senator Paul Pinsky is carrying several of our bills. So we have a great group of folks. I think that the climate is different, and there's a definite recognition that the state has a lot of needs right now, and that revenue is how we support those needs. It's responding to the pandemic and continuing to uphold the commitments to education funding and healthcare and other big picture priorities.
Okay. Tyra, I skipped over you, but I'm coming back to you now. You didn't get any specific questions because I believe everybody's in sync with you, but could you give us some insight on what you see as roadblocks and support, both horizontal and vertical, for what you're trying to accomplish this year?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Just to let you all know this, to an earlier question in the chat, Delegate Dumais is sponsoring this bill in the House, still seeking a Senate sponsor, but we're getting very close. So that's who is going to be carrying the bill. And opposition, likely opposition, is people who have opposed in the past, as Callie has mentioned. We're expecting people who work with those workers who are currently exempt. We're going to, assume that they will be back to fight getting those workers covered again. And some of those folks include the agricultural sector, the seasonal worker sector, and the temporary worker sector. So those types of employers, and also just business interests in general. I think that there is going to be a difficult balance to strike, understanding that businesses, especially small businesses, are going through a lot right now, but also understanding that the workers who work in those places and workers generally are also facing an uphill battle, considering that worker protections aren't where they need to be in the first place. So that is some strong opposition that we're anticipating, and we're trying to generate research regarding how this can be paid for, so that we can answer those questions during session.
Okay, thank you. And now I'm going to talk to Rakara Jones. You did get a question. What groups would be opposing your bill? And that goes along with our broader question on who you're getting support from, who you're getting opposition from, and where horizontally and vertically those come from.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I think both Tara and Callie kind of just laid out the opposition. That it's very similar for our legislation, that we expect the chamber and just corporations and folks who don't think it's important to protect workers to oppose a bill like this. And it's really interesting because a lot of times when I go over the legislation with people, they say like normally two things, like this is pretty common sense stuff, right? And they can't believe that the governor hasn't already put some of this stuff into place. But we are gonna, even though it seems pretty basic, there is gonna be, I think, a huge fight over two major parts of the bill. As most people can imagine, it's gonna be over hazard pay because we don't like to pay workers. And it's gonna be over making sure that folks are paid when they need to quarantine. So I expect a lot of opposition in those areas. But our support has come from, there's so many, Donna Edwards talked a lot about how many people that we've lost, but there's so many stories from frontline workers. And I think every time I hear a new one, I think we know what folks on the front lines are experiencing, but when you hear their stories of just being afraid to go to work, afraid to bring something back home, it's just heartbreaking. So I think we are going to see a lot of opposition, but I think there's going to be, there is some appetite to move towards putting some of these protections into place. And I'll just end by saying our bill sponsors, which I neglected to mention, in the House, Chairman Derek Davis is the bill sponsor, and in the Senate, Senator Malcolm Augustine is the sponsor for the Protect Maryland Essential Workers Act. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move on to Donna Edwards. And you have a specific question about your upcoming AFL-CIO legislative event. Can you provide some information on how to get an invite or how to get involved in that?
Well, unfortunately, that is just limited to our affiliates. So it'll be an in-house legislative conference so that we have the opportunity to openly speak among ourselves with the unions to see where we all stand on our bills.
Okay, and let's see, when you talk about environmental justice, what should that mean to workers in the energy industry, the workers in general, no matter what industry?
Is that my question?
Yes.
We have a lot of information and discussion quite often on environmental bills, particularly as they get presented in Maryland. And when we look at it, we look at what is sustainable. So for us, and ironically, I was just in a conversation with Cornell University and New York Central Labor Council I think it was Friday, about trying to bring on a staff person that would help us do more research and be able to really talk about the sustainability of it. for us, we want to talk about making sure that there are jobs in the pipeline replaced before we take anything offline, that those jobs are good jobs and they pay well, unlike most solar jobs out here, that there is a career path in them, that there is project labor agreements and that there's apprenticeships that are real apprenticeships, not just, these typical things. And I just want to say, we've been working on this for the last 30 years. And every one of our construction and trades have a whole clean energy component in their apprenticeship programs and have for that many years, as well as the steel workers and the UAW as far as manufacturing. So we want to look at actually building out transportation to remove more cars off of the roads. We want to look at retrofitting buildings so that we're not leaking all this out of the buildings. We want to look at the methane that is coming out of underground. The methane you don't see is killing us more than what we do see. And so there's a lot of, it's a much deeper dive than what Maryland has done in the past. And so we need some help in researching and moving that forward.
Wow, I'm going to take all of your discussion and put in another advertisement for the environmental seminar that we have coming up and ask Scott to repost that information on our environmental seminar too, because I think there could be a good marriage with what you're proposing right now. And finally, referring back to your legislative events, where and when will you be posting the outcome, your legislative priorities?
Well, I've let you know as far as the state fed conglomerate that we will be working on pandemic bills, and we will be working on economic bills that will include the language that we put in the Clean Jobs Act. I know that there's another amendment coming to that, and we'll have to look at it closely because, quite frankly, people fight back. Even solar companies fight back on the requirements that we have put in there as far as, what a good job is, the definition of a good job. So that's what we'll be doing. The priorities that come out of our affiliates, we leave that for them, like Ricard and SEIU. I mean, we work with their bills, but we don't necessarily list them as the priority for the state fed because, all of our affiliates are also independent.
Okay, I'm going to skip the question of who your supporters and detractors are. I have a feeling that's too many unless you want to jump in with that right now.
Now, obviously, we go up against the same, the chamber and sometimes just, individual businesses, sometimes the manufacturing association. So, it depends. We work fairly closely though with the solar energy, offshore wind companies and move forward because in the legislation that gave them all of the permits, there's a lot more protection for what type of jobs they create versus the type of jobs that we get out of solar.
And one more question that got handed to me, and it's going to be asked of all of your all of our speakers today. What do you want from the groups that are participating today? How can we be supportive of you?
You want me to start with that?
Yeah.
I would just say that as we do look for, move towards getting more money in as far as the revenues, we definitely need to look more deeper into all of these giveaways, ask for a lot more information to come out of the comptroller's office as to the reporting. So many times people get these tax credits, the businesses, and it's self-reporting. Yes, I hired 50 more people at X amount, and there's no tracking between the comptroller's office and dollar. So the silos have to be taken down. I think as we approach these bills where we are looking for workers that don't have the opportunity yet to organize, that we consider what kind of language we could put in there that would allow them without retaliation, if they want to pull together even if it's a shop of 5 and they want to collectively talk with their manager, then they should be able to do that. And I think that we also need to like step back and take a very macro look at not where this bill is going to get us today or even 2 years from now, but what will a legislation produce 10 years out?
That's an excellent response. Thank you. Sheila and Sam, how about some of our broad-based questions on what support you're getting, what roadblocks you see, and also what you can ask us to do to support you?
Yes,
Daniel,
thank you. Thank you much. First, I think you've heard our bill, the Transportation Equity Analyses and Assurances Act of 2021. I think one, a roadblock, not often called a roadblock, but is inertia. This is something new. There's so many who believe the agency can police itself. But when they suggest that, we offer this proof. When the communities, employers, transit riders, transit workers, advocacy organizations, our organization and others push back on those proposed cuts on September 1st, they rescinded all of them. And they rescinded all of them because they couldn't defend any of them. And that's what would happen if we leave this matter to the agency to police itself. Another obstacle from time to time is a discussion that, well, MDOT has policies that track Title VI. We have Title VI on the wall probably everywhere in the state with an employer, but Title VI is federally enforced. It is not state enforced. We need state enforcement of the rights to equal access, to equal protection of the law in the transportation sector. The other is that we need to make sure people understand the role of race in this issue. Public transportation is racially conflicted wherever people of color live in the United States, with no exception. Maryland, Baltimore are not exceptions. What happened with this issue on the 1st of September, remember, this is a continuation of the policies since the cancellation of the red line 5 years ago. It still has at its base the most disproportionately adverse impact on Black people. Say it straight. People of color, low-income households, transit riders, of course, but at the base is an unwillingness and an inexperience with dealing with fairness. I won't just say equity, justice, fairness. And what we're saying is we need to have a policy that shifts the structure of enforcement and the application of policy, execution of policy, but particularly when there are possible disparities in the impacts. So we want to make sure that our issue is, of course, having an alternative to the agency policing itself. We need a lot of public information on this issue. Most don't know about it, but something must be done and can be done, and this is one of the steps. And finally, there is also an issue of race in this session, in this question. The proposals that our coalition are making, for example, we've taken the lead in advocacy for the creation of a Baltimore Regional Transportation Authority. The first step taken by moderates in the advocacy community is to suppress our history and our contribution to that struggle. Nowhere in the Eno Foundation report, sponsored by normal friends of ours, CMTA and the Greater Washington Partnership, nowhere is there a reference to the fact that we're already underway with the proposed amendment to the Baltimore City Charter to compel the city to take the first steps toward creating a regional transportation authority. I want to let certainly Delegate Ruth contribute and discuss some of these other questions you ask in the broad base, what can be done. But I certainly want to speak with Rikara and Donna about the role of workers, of essential workers, and coverage for them when we celebrate on the 21st of December, the Baltimore Transit Equity Solidarity Day. It's the opportunity for us to put in motion, the walk and not just the talk.
Okay, great. And so I'm going to turn to Jews United for Justice. 2 questions. What evidence do you have that late fees have been imposed and evictions for failure to pay rent during the pandemic? In other words, where can we find some evidence to support this concept?
Sure. Yeah, I made a note of that, and I'll be sure to follow up with you directly. If you want to message me your email address, or I can get that from the organizers. But certainly, members of the Renters United Maryland Coalition have access to data, especially from Rent Court. Happy to get that to you. I mean, obviously, I think just jumping off of this, there's a need for, I think, in many of our issues, more tracking of data. And so that's part of one of the pieces of legislation going forward this year, is to put in a requirement that we have better data tracking, especially on evictions through Rent Court and through the sheriffs who are carrying out eviction orders. So that's a big piece of being able to dig deep into the data and continue to build the case for right to counsel and renter support and rent relief, especially during the pandemic. But yeah, I'll be sure to follow up specifically with that data.
And we'll include it with our final summit information as well.
Great.
Would you be advocating for continued foreclosure moratoriums and forbearance options consistent with the CARES Act? And I happen to work with Scott on this issue. By that, he means when there are foreclosures, will those events be either held within the construct of the CARES Act or canceled altogether? And how are you handling that concept? Is that something you're undertaking?
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly part of our conversations, especially with legislators as we move forward, right? Obviously, this is a key part that needs to be addressed as well when we're working on renters' rights and housing in general. So yeah, I mean, you won't see it explicitly in the materials that I presented, obviously, but it is part of our conversations and it's part of what we're looking at. Right now, I mean, I think there are so many aspects that have been contributed, especially during the pandemic, right? I mean, as you'll see in Zephyr's materials in the handout, Maryland currently faces $280 million projected in rent shortfall by January 2021. And so the impact on renters, but then also on homeowners. And so a key piece that I'll highlight that I think often catches folks maybe by surprise, but the fact that the rent relief funding, we're calling for that to go directly to landlords, but also requiring that they show documentation that this goes to meet failed payments by renters, but that it goes directly to landlords. We're hoping that that's something that then we can also gain additional support from landlords in the process of advocating for this to help them get assistance directly. But again, happy to continue to follow up on that question specifically.
Thank you. So returning to our lightning round, how can the people participating in today's summit be supportive of what you're doing?
Absolutely. I love that question. I think that everyone here is mutually supportive of each other, which is great. And I would say just follow the coalitions. I think it's amazing that almost all of the work being discussed today is being done in coalition between groups of shared interests and shared values. So for these 2 issues specifically, again, Renters United Maryland, make sure you connect with them. And then also for the Time to Care Act coalition as well, which will hopefully be convening in the next few weeks to discuss the bill going forward in the strategy. So if you have capacity, which I know everyone is fairly tapped out, but if you have capacity to jump in at any level, especially sharing stuff on social media and bringing these issues up when you meet with legislators going forward into the session, as much as we can lift up each other's legislative priorities, I think the better.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Sheila Ruth, who appears to have something to contribute to our lightning round.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Samuel did a great job of covering the question, and so I don't have a lot to add. But I did want to mention in terms of resistance, I expect that we will see resistance from MDOT, just because this is a change and it's normal for institutions to resist change. I did, in crafting the bill, try to, impact them as little as possible by dovetailing these onto processes that already exist. So it's not, not a major change in the way they work. And, also tried to really minimize the cost factor, but there are going to be costs with setting up anything new. And so I did also want to call out to Cali and the work that they're doing, and just mention the importance of these revenue bills. The importance of these revenue bills cannot be understated, because, as Callie said, they're kind of key to everything. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tyra, something to add to our lightning round on how our groups can be supportive of you?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, if you have the luxury of working from home or staying safe at home as much as possible, call your legislators regarding these issues in support of workers who can't. As session is virtual, possibly for most of the session, it may be difficult to reach legislators. So keep dialing, emailing until things change. And second, if you're a worker on the call, talk with your coworkers and collectively organize to demand change from your employer. Reach out to organizations who are on this call, and as well as the Baltimore Black Worker Center, and of course my organization, the Public Justice Center, to learn what your options are if your workplace is unsafe. And if you feel comfortable, share your experience with legislators. There are a lot of workers going through a lot of different issues right now, and they need to know what's happening on the ground.
Thank you. Callie, I'm going to turn to you. Do you have anything for us?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna just put in the chat the Take Action link for the Fair Funding Coalition. It's a petition, and if you sign onto that, you'll be on the coalition email list. Be notified at kind of key points in session where we're really looking for folks to reach out to their legislators and share their support. So whether that's email, calling offices, social media, as well as you can follow our coalition on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook, and we'll be sharing some some materials in the coming weeks that you can help retweet, share, help lift up, and spread the word about these important issues.
And Rikara, you're going last, but that'll mean everybody remembers the last thing said. So what do you have for the lightning round?
I shared our website. It's www.protectmdworkers.org. We are asking essential workers to go on there and share your stories. You can record a video, you can type your story. We really want to focus again on shared stories and experiences of frontline workers. So if you know any frontline workers, please send them to that website so they can share their stories. I've also posted a link to a toolkit where there's graphics that you can share on social media, on Facebook and on Instagram, just asking everybody to please reshare those. And then, as you speak to your elected officials, please just mention how important is, if we're gonna call these workers essential, we need to treat them as essential and make sure that we protect them properly. So I just ask you to reach out to your legislators as we move into session. And I really just wanna thank you all for being here this morning and to hear about these important pieces of legislation that I hope move forward.
Go ahead and post it in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rikara. Quick question.
Turning it back over to Ed. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Alex, for doing such a fantastic job on the question section. We thank all the speakers for being here with us this afternoon and agreeing to speak. And remind everyone, we have this afternoon our final session on education and health, where Strong Schools, Maryland State Education Association, Maryland Citizens Health Initiative, Compassion and Choices, Maryland Family Network, and NARAL Pro-Choice will be speaking. And we look forward to seeing you all this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us.
Samuel had a last question.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I've operated the chat properly. I've put a notice in the chat with the link to the October 20th Midday with Tom Hall interview with Kevin Quinn that shows you why we definitely need this legislation. But I'm not sure if it's properly entered into the chat.
Is it?
Can you see that?
Can you see what he entered in the chat? Yeah, he just did. It's new.
It's the link to that broadcast.
Repost it again, Samuel.
Okay. I'm going to ask you, Ed, perhaps offline now, how to do just that properly, because I'm not seeming to get that right.
Copy the link and paste it into the chat room if you can.
I just did that.
Okay, well, we'll
And
put
you
it
don't
in.
see it yet. So let's work on it after, or when we close this session,
Well, you
perhaps.
want everybody to see it now because they're all leaving.
I do want everyone to see it, but I'm not sure exactly how you're instructing me. I've put it into everyone,
Here,
and
let's
it's,
go here and talk to him.
what do I do after I enter the information? Do I click
Hit enter. Hit enter. Just
Enter,
hit enter to send the message. Yeah.
and that enter is found where?
The enter key on your keyboard
It might be labeled return.
or return. Yeah.
We can also paste it in the next workshop. Oh, there it is. There it is.
We got it. We got it. Yeah, we're good. We got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Alex, for doing a wonderful job with the questions.
Yes.
I like that lightning round.
Yeah, that was Scott's idea.
Well, thank you, Scott.